So this video is the meat and potatoes of evolutionary astrology. So in this one, I'm going to cover Pluto and the nodes of the moon, which I'll say it's the core of your chart, but it's not your chart, right? And it's not your energetic expression. The entire natal chart is your energetic expression, but these symbols are important if you're looking at your chart from your soul's perspective, and specifically how I see it as your it's like before you incarnated here in this reality, your soul had a structured outline or a plan of what it wanted to experience. And so these symbols are the central theme, right? And so your life experience, kind of everything that you experience here, is focused around the significance of these symbols in your natal chart. So I like to look at Pluto as the self empowerment journey, which means that think of this as your soul incarnating in many, many, many lifetimes here on this planet and needing to experience the full spectrum of the energy. And so, what do I mean by that? I mean, if you think about life experiences, all of them, it's an experience, right? So you drop into, as a soul, drop into this body in this 3D reality, and you're like, okay, well, what does it feel like to experience bliss? What does it feel like to experience joy? What does it feel like to experience abandonment? What does it feel like to experience loss? What does it feel like to experience sexual energy? What does it feel like? Like, I can keep going, right? Think of any experience that you can potentially have here is part of the experience, right? So to become impactful, what that to how do I articulate this correctly, what I'm feeling here? How do I know who I am without having contrast, compare and contrast, right? If I, how do I really experience love if I don't experience the lack of love, right? And I'm talking about like earthly love, like somebody loving me, or even self love, right? Like not having self love is just the opposite of self love, right? So, how do I know or orient myself in this reality, in this dualistic reality, is that my soul experiences that, right? And as you gather these soul experiences and you continue to have lifetimes and you continue to raise your awareness and your consciousness level, then you don't need to experience the extremes of the duality anymore, right? So think of like ascended masters like Jesus and Buddha, right? Like they're an expression of source energy that is vibrating at a high frequency, right? But they think of them as no different than anyone else, meaning that I'm going to use an extreme example here, but think of like Hitler and the atrocities that were generated from his being, right? And then looking at Jesus or Buddha on the other end of the spectrum, if you take a step back, everything you see is source energy. So the expression of Hitler, the expression of Jesus and Buddha was an expression of source energy, right? So if you think of it from, it's hard to say hierarchy, but there's like a spiritual hierarchy, which is not the same as the hierarchy that we typically know in society, right? Like if you think of a corporate job where you have like a VP and then you have like a director, and then above the VP, CEO, and then you have, people that are in the mailroom, or you have day laborers, like you have a full hierarchy, right? That goes from CEO down to, you name it, right? Just the hierarchy of an organization, there's an implied, well, the CEO is more powerful, he's smarter and more competent than the janitor, right? And that's how it's seen in society. But from the spiritual hierarchy point of view, is no there is no difference. It's just the lived experience is the difference, right? Like Hitler was a deeply troubled expression of source energy. Jesus, Buddha were a highly evolved expression of source energy, but they're source energy. So it's like, here's source energy, right? And then source energy has an experience. And so, what is that experience, right? So, what experience do you have on this planet? And so, I know that was kind of a philosophical start to this one, but I think it's important to understand everything is an expression of source energy, regardless of how it behaves, how it acts, what the result is. And so, obviously, we would like in this reality to live in a way that is more towards the end of like Jesus and Buddha, right? Where there's an enlightenment, there's an understanding, there's just a wisdom that gets carried where this reality becomes sweeter, it becomes purposeful, it becomes joyful, there's play, there's curiosity, there's openness, right? All of the keywords on the top of the emotional scale, which I'll probably share here in a bit, which is where we would like to be, right? And so aside from you, me, everyone that you see having their own unique version of an experience in this 3D reality, there's the universal consciousness, which is collective consciousness, which also carries a frequency, right? And so the universal consciousness of the planet, the universe planet, is increasing in consciousness, which is great, right? Which means that people are, the term is waking up, right? Which is like they're understanding more of their multidimensionality. They're taking more responsibility for their own thought forms and their own actions. And so that's allowing this reality, or it's opening the door for us to experience this reality in a way that is more joyful, expansive, co-creative, right? Like think of all of the words of just feeling at peace and feeling good and being able to explore this reality in a way that it feels good, right? But when the collective consciousness raises, or there is a process in place for the collective consciousness to raise, that's going to bring all the shit to the surface, right? So like if you're watching this or you watch things about the consciousness being raised and you're like, but I'm not seeing that, right? Like I'm seeing there's a lot of destruction and a lot of not so high vibrational things going on. People are hurting each other and there being um, fear and power plays and things of that sort going on. And the reason why you may be seeing that and might be seeing that more frequently is because the unconscious patterns, the belief systems all need to bubble to the surface for them to be able to for them to be able to be seen and to be processed, understood, and transcended, right? And integrated. And so, yeah, it's not all unicorns and rainbows when consciousness level gets raised, whether that's on a universal consciousness level or at an individual level. It's not always easy, right? If you see people that go through spiritual awakenings, or you watch videos about people that have gone through spiritual awakenings, it's typically not easy, right? Your ego gets everything you've constructed in your reality up into a certain point gets wiped out. And so it can be extremely disorienting, right? Or when you raise your consciousness level, if you if your intent is to raise your consciousness level, all of your stuff comes to the surface, all of your unconscious programming, all of the things maybe from past lives, trauma, like there's indicators from an EA perspective in your astrology chart, which could indicate that, right? Which that stuff all needs to come to the surface and be processed. And the only way you can raise your consciousness is to go through, be open and go through those experiences, right? Or if you're at a lower consciousness level, you project your unconscious stuff out into the world and then it gets responded to. And then when you get that response and you come back to yourself and you're like, well, why did that happen? That simple question of why did that happen and being curious now opens the door to heal that, understand it, transcend it, shift limiting beliefs, heal your energetic expression, right? All of those things. And so when we look at these symbols in the natal chart, or when I look at it for myself, or I do readings for other people, what level of consciousness are you at will determine how you experience those. And it's all good, meaning that if you are experiencing it as difficult, being able to look at your chart and being curious and being like, well, why were these experiences difficult? Or why do I keep getting this feedback in relationships? Or why do I keep struggling in this area? Right. And and that's the power of evolutionary astrology, is you can look at your chart and be able to start decoding and saying, oh, okay, well, I understand, right? Like I have Pluto in this house. And so, yeah, it may be a little bit difficult, but it's for my soul's evolution. And so, can I work with that and be able to understand what the feedback from my external environment is showing me about myself? And a lot of times there's symbols like if you have Pluto retrograde, it could be it's going to take the good part of this lifetime probably for you to become empowered in that area. Can you be accepting of that? Can you be okay with messing up or not getting it right or trying different things out? And yeah, this feels good for a little while, but it's not quite it. And then I try something else. And yeah, that didn't work either. It's not quite it, right? That's actually part of your journey, is to go through that process. So can you embrace the process, right? So with that, I'm going to go into Pluto. I'm going to cover the Pluto generations because you're part of a Pluto generation, which is Pluto in a specific zodiac sign. And then I'm going to cover Pluto through the houses. And I'm also going to touch a bit on the nodes of the moon. So I'm not going to go through sign and house placements for those, but I'm going to describe what type of info they can give you in your natal chart. So with that, let me share my screen and I will get into the presentation. So off the heels of what I just went through, Pluto, your self-empowerment journey, right? And so the chances are you've had many, many lifetimes here on this planet, and your soul has a plan before you come in here. There's a soul agreement with the family that you incarnate into, and your soul has there's a place in your life that you want to become empowered, which means that you need to experience this reality, right? So I kind of covered that in the beginning. So where Pluto is in your natal chart by house, sign, and aspects will give you some clues into what your self-empowerment journey is. And I'm going to get into this later on in the presentation. So the other thing here that I touched on briefly in the beginning too is if you see this symbol in your chart and there's an RX next to it, that's how most astrology programs show it, is this RX here. That means that you've been here before, right? So whatever house, sign, and aspects that Pluto is in, it's going to typically with a Pluto RX, that means you're going to try many different ways of experiencing that energy in this lifetime. And so when I see that in somebody's chart, I'm like, just know that and be okay with it, right? I have Pluto retrograde in the 10th house, how I'm seen in society. So I'm going to try many different ways of coming out in society, although for the first half of my life, it was pretty static in the IT field. There was changes of environments, but it was still within that field. But now I'm off doing astrology, right? So I've made a left, so to speak. So I'm trying to find my own unique way of contributing to society. And then, so the number of hard aspects is equated to the intensity of your evolution. So I have this here. I was trained, or I was in the Jeffrey Wolf Green School of Evolutionary Astrology. This is what is taught. I intuitively feel that this isn't exactly true just because of the raising of consciousness on the planet. So when I say hard aspects, I'm talking about, and I haven't covered aspects yet, but if you're familiar, any planetary bodies or symbols that are directly opposing Pluto, or any planets or symbols that are at a 90-degree angle to Pluto, so squares or oppositions, would be considered hard aspects, right? Hard aspects. But it's all, when I say hard, do you experience it as hard? I don't know. We'd have to sit in a session and we'd have to discuss it, right? And so I do agree with the intensity of the evolution. I've noticed that with, like, if people have a lot of retrograde planets, like more than, if they have 3 or more retrograde planets in their chart, then they usually have experiences that will keep reorient them, so to speak. Um, Number of hard aspects, oppositions and squares. Yeah, I mean, there's normally some tension or opposition, which is the indicative of those symbols. But it depends on how aware you are. Like if you know your chart, or if you're a more conscious, if you have more consciousness, then yeah, they still are experienced as tension or oppositions, but you're aware of why, right? The underlying meaning of it. So even though they might be experienced as a little bit difficult or creating tension, there's an underlying feeling within you that you're like, I'm good, right? Like I know how to navigate my way through this. And I'm also learning through the process. Why am I being opposed, or why is there tension, right? So that's why the consciousness level is important on how you'll experience this. If you're at a lower consciousness level, then yeah, then you're going to experience it probably a little more acutely than somebody that's more aware. And so part of this process or part of your soul's plan is to embrace the polarity house and sign of Pluto. So if Pluto is in your seventh house, let's say your seventh house of relationships, it's going to be important to understand your own unique self expression, first house, right? And so the polarity house and sign will be important energies for you to understand and embrace. And then number 5 here, I covered that already. Awareness and consciousness determine the lived experience. And then the moon's nodes, which correlate to Pluto, but you can also view those separately, south node and north node, just in terms of your own unique expression. And so the moon's nodes, if you think about the south node of the moon, it's where you're comfortable. It symbolizes your past. It symbolizes the conditioned environment in your childhood, is also symbolic of the north node of the moon. It's how you experienced your Pluto placement in past lives. So if you look at your Pluto placement, you look at the south node of the moon, that is where you're comfortable or where you left off experiencing that Pluto placement. The north node of the moon is a new way of expressing yourself, potentially. And I have an asterisk here next to that because with my writing tool. So I have an asterisk next to that because if there are squares, if there's planets that are square to the nodes of the moon, that means you've experienced some of the south node energy, some of the north node energy in a past lifetime. And so in this lifetime, you're looking to experience the full spectrum of that energy, right? So it's not, the north node is not always brand new, but sometimes I'd say that it is. If you do not have any square planets, then the north node is completely opposite of your south node and a different way of experiencing this reality from your soul's perspective. And so a little bit more detail on the moon and its nodes. What are they, right, from a technical standpoint? So they're calculated points. They're not actually planets or bodies in the sky. They are calculated points. They're where the sun and the moon's orbits intersect. And so the south node is here, and that's the symbol for the south node. And then the north node is here where the orbits intersect, and that's the symbol for the north node. And then, so the south node, I touched on this a little earlier, the container that you've selected with your family. So your family unit, your soul, it's like you sit, I kind of had this vision of you sitting at a boardroom table prior to incarnating in this reality. And you're like, okay, well, what do I want to experience? Right. And so you and your whatever container was held for you, your parents or caregivers when you were a child, that was the agreement. Right. And that can be anything, right? Like people may say, well, my parents weren't really there, or I was a foster child, or I suffered abuse. Like, why would I agree to that? And it's like, well, if you think of everything being a an expression of unconditional love, which means that in this reality, I may need to experience some things that you can think of as not being pleasant experiences, right? And why would you want to experience that? Well, this is duality, right? So how do I know myself is to experience the duality, the lack of love or the lack of being supported or the lack of emotional support. That doesn't mean that's your experience. You also can experience the other end of that, which means that maybe your family was there for you and emotionally as supportive and good role models, and they supported your unique expression, right? And everything in between can be what you experienced, right? But when you look at your chart, you can be like, oh, I get it, right? I see some oppositions, I see some squares, I see how I show up in that environment, and I see the underlying reason why my soul may have selected that energy is because I wanted to be empowered in certain areas, right? So that's important to understand with the South Node symbolism. And like I said, it's how you actualized your Pluto placement in past lifetimes. So the South Node ruler is how you have shown up in other lifetimes, your energetic expression. So if you look at the ruler of the South Node, and we'll get into this when I do examples, but I'm actually not going to do examples here. Maybe in another video I will, but so like let's just pick an example of your South Node is in the I'll do mine, South Node, sixth house in Gemini, right? So my agreement or the childhood environment was the Virgo house, the sixth house, and it's in Gemini, Mercury house, right? So taking in data from my family was definitely modeled the sixth house Virgo, working hard, efforting, getting educated, finding a good job, supporting yourself, like that kind of stuff. And then that ruler of the South Node in Gemini for me was is Mercury, and Mercury in my chart is in the second house in Aquarius, which means that's how I show up in that South Node Gemini sixth house environment, which is Aquarius, which is unique, thinking outside of the box, a little bit different. And so that's definitely when I look at my chart, I'm like, yeah, that's how I experienced my childhood. And obviously, I didn't know it at the time while I was in it, but I look back now and I'm like, yeah, I was unique. I didn't really fit in. I was a little bit different, right? And so that's how I show up in that environment. But that was the agreement to show up in that container, and there was a purpose for it. So the north node, like I said, is an opposite. It's exactly opposite of the south node in your chart. So, like my example, south node, sixth house Gemini. My north node is in the 12th house, really on the border. My nodes are really on the ascendant and the descendant. And so my north node is in Sagittarius, the opposite side sign of Gemini, on the right on the ascendant, like tipping into the 12th house in the Porphyry house system, right? So it's an opposite way of being. So typically, like when I took the courses from Tom Jacobs, I like the way he explained it. He's like, when you were a child, the North Node expression was like you would probably make fun of those people, right? Because it's a completely different way from the way you've been conditioned in childhood, right? So you would typically see those people that embodied that energy and be like, wow, they're weird, right? Or like they're off, right? So for me, North Node, Sagittarius, 12th house, conjunct Neptune, a more spiritual way of being. And yeah, in childhood, I probably would look at like tarot card readers or intuitive people or mystics and be like, yeah, that's strange. That's weird, right? And it's like, well, now I'm stepping into that for myself, right? So it's completely different, even though I do have a square. So I've experienced some of this energy before. And then the North Node ruler, how is that? How is this going to be actualized, right, for you in this lifetime? So in my example, North Node Sagittarius, I would find Jupiter. What sign and house is Jupiter in? Jupiter for me is in the fourth house in Pisces. So that's home, emotions, Cancer energy, right? Mixed with Pisces in the fourth house. Being able to understand my emotions, be able to flow throughout my day. Doing videos at home could be an expression of this energy, right? So, North Node ruler would give you more context. So, I'm briefly going to go through these. These are the Pluto generations. So, you are part of a Pluto generation. So, whatever sign Pluto is in for you, there's a time frame of people that incarnated, right? So, Leo was 1939 to 1957. So everyone that was born in that time frame had their Pluto in Leo. The only thing that differentiated them was what house was Leo in for them, what aspects, right? That kind of stuff made them unique. Leo, to sum up Leo, there's a deep seated feeling within these people that there is a special destiny for them to fulfill. There's a creativity, there's an innate gift within them that they're trying to find the right way to express that out in society. And so that was the undercurrent of the Leo generation. And just like the Leo archetype, how that is experienced can go anywhere from they are inspirational and provide energy to the masses, right? Other people. Scale is not important. It doesn't need to be to the masses. It could just be to the people close to them, right? Leo just has a creativity and they want to express it and be acknowledged for it. The lower vibrational expression of Leo is maybe not feeling powerful, feeling like they have a special destiny, but it comes out in a distorted way. Like, I don't feel powerful enough, so I need to overpower other people, right? I feel like I need to take their power or to have people be underneath me makes me feel powerful, right? So it's like a false, like gaining your power externally type of a deal, right? And anything in between, right? So it's just an expression of this energy. Virgo is 1957 to 1972. So this generation is healers, energy workers, medical breakthroughs, the link between mind, body. I'd say the link between the mind, body, and soul, because they're all linked, right? So this generation carried an innate or had the potential to carry an innate ability to be able to contribute in these areas, right? The other thing with Virgo archetype is humility, right? Like if you think of Virgo coming after Leo, it's the refinement of Leo energy. So it's like, how do I purify? How do I understand my actions and the response to those actions? And how do I make adjustments, right? Both internally and then that gets reflected externally, right? So strong analytical mind is definitely a part of the Virgo generation too. Think of like the another end of the spectrum, which Virgo energy can be super hypercritical, both of themselves, which gets reflected externally, which means they can be hypercritical of others, right? Like, you're not doing this right. Like, right, like that kind of an energy can be part of this too. And then there's the Libra generation, which this is the generation I'm part of. So 1972 through 1984. So human relations, Libra, seventh house archetype, right? This generation has the ability to impact personal and global relations. So being able to be in a relationship with somebody, think of it on a personal level, and really having the ability to listen to another person's perspective and be able to understand their reality and to realize that everyone has their own unique experience and their own perception of things, and all of it is valid, right? And so this generation would have the ability to think of being in a room and be able to have a discussion where everyone's offering different opinions, and then be able to synthesize or be able to understand how all of those contribute to the larger whole, right? Can be part of this archetype. And just the understanding of what I just stated, right? That everyone has their own unique expression and it's all valid. And I can attest to this last part here too, which is true, is there is a soul level. There's a soul level discomfort with conflict, which drives, I should actually have circled all of that. There can be a soul level discomfort with conflict, which drives the path toward harmony. So conflict internally and con- conflict externally, right? It just doesn't feel good for there to be conflict. And so, kind of like tensions, like squares or oppositions in your astrology chart, what is that tension showing you? It's trying to find harmony and balance. Where am I off, or where can I refine myself internally, or where can I be more open and accepting of other people, or be able to really listen to other people so there can be harmony and balance. And so the next generation is Scorpio, which is 1984 to 1995. And so this is the I call bullshit generation. It's kind of like how I like to see this. I love Scorpio energy. It's the why. It's the psychologist. It's the I want to know the deeper meaning, or I can just feel when things are off, right? I just know. I just have an intuitive knowing. And so this generation, what is the collective generation of Scorpio here to seed on the planet? Breaking apart conditioning, societal norms, and structures that go against people's essence, right? So, containers that are not supportive of somebody's unique expression is not going to work for the Scorpio generation. They're going to say, something's off here, right? Like, I don't believe that. Or you're saying one thing, but I don't think that's really what's going on here, right? Is part of this generation. And so I have here to break through to truth, really emotional, intellectual, spiritual, physical core of others, right? In yourself, to understand how it works, right? And understand where there can be blocks or there can be limiting beliefs. So Scorpio is going to dig all of that stuff up, right? Like if you listen to the intro where I talked about, kind of the raising of consciousness, Scorpio is a big part of that, the Scorpio generation, which is we need to bring this shit to the surface so that we can see it, so we can heal it, so we can transform it, so this can be a better existence, right? So that's part of the Scorpio generation. And then we have Sagittarius, which is 1995 through 2008. So this generation, spiritual views, but I'd say Sagittarius generation is more bringing on board, leading with your intuition, leading with your heart, realizing that you're more than just the five senses, and aligning with your higher self, right? I think that's really this generation and what they're seeding on the planet. So the people born 1995 to 2008, there is a feeling of special destiny here with this generation too, just like the Leo generation. And they're going to help people align with their guides, with their higher self, right? I think that's the best way that I can describe this is we've, in recent history, we've had a, think of Pluto like the extremes, right? We've been on the extreme end of over reliance on the mind, conditioning the mind, using the mind to support ourselves. And now it's time to become more aware of your intuition and your higher self and using that to lead the way and to understand there's a larger container, there's a larger energetic container that's supporting your existence, right? So that you can be okay with aligning with your heart's desires and not knowing or understanding or figuring things out with your mind, and having your life unfold before you in ways that you would never have imagined with your mind, right? So it makes life richer. It's more, you're more connected to all of who you are. So that's part of the Sagittarius generation. And then we move to Capricorn, which is 2008 to 2024. And so this generation is, if you think of Capricorn coming after Sagittarius, it's like, how do I ground this into reality, right? How do I create new structures that can be supportive of people realizing their multidimensionality, right? And being their true authentic selves. So this generation comes in with natural leadership abilities. Like I can take all of this Scorpio and all of these, this Sagittarius and all of the prior zodiac sign generations coming in, and I can show you or I can create structures that are going to be supportive of people who are more evolved. And then we have Aquarius, which is 2023 to 2044. So Pluto stepped into Aquarius around, it's, I think it's still there at this time, but it's in retrograde, so it's heading back into Capricorn, and then it'll go back into Aquarius in 2024 all the way through 2044. So what are the babies being born during this time? What are they bringing in? Liberation, right? So Aquarius is definitely related to Uranus, and it's related to authentic self-expression. So if I get pulled to Uranus and the symbolism from an EA perspective, Uranus is your innate gift, skills, and abilities that you carry, that you've gained from soul experiences in other lifetimes, and being able to express them here on this planet to better humanity, right? The other symbol of Uranus in your chart, especially if it's you have Uranus retrograde by house sign and aspects, is to recall, to process, to shift and transform any trauma from past lives that was repressed, right? Anything that was deeply impactful that has not been brought to conscious awareness and transcended will come up to be processed, right? So that's part of this generation. I actually see this generation being able to help people heal too, is part of this. So I'm going to stop this video here, and I'm going to create another one that's going to talk about Pluto through each of the 12 houses in the zodiac. And so that will be linked in the description box below. You can go ahead and check it out after this one. And as always, I appreciate you being here, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks.